Thank you, Javier, for your presentation, which gels quite well with my presentation, zeroing in on a very small scale business company. Didn't make it big then, which is probably what made it interesting for me, to go and look for companies that appear and disappear, and no longer exist and leave very little traces, and whether we can sort of find a way to, and this company in particular, this concrete paving and terrazzo company, which operated between 1936, so in hard times, for 30 years or so, has provided me the opportunity to study a small size enterprise owned and run by Friulani, so by Italians that came from a particular region, who were equipped with knowledge and skills in terrazzo and concrete paving techniques, as we've just heard. So as mentioned by Javier in his previous presentation, the bulk of the labor force that was employed in that particular industry, came from a particular area of Italy. Their legacy more broadly of Italian and Australian building construction firms is particularly rich in Melbourne, and it spans over a century. Notably, we see a seminal phase during the interwar period of the 1920s and 30s, when such migrant workers were not only monopolizing the sector at that time, but in significant numbers became self-employed and entrepreneurs. They set up enterprises, some of which turned out to be leading construction companies in the post-war period. So indeed, up until the immediate post-Second World War period, the propensity of Italians in Australia, we're talking about 30,000 Italians living in Australia at that time, to become independent producers, service providers, or business people in general was considerable. In 1947, so at the cusp of the immediate post-war period, half of all first-born Italian males in Australia were either self-employed or entrepreneurs, a percentage much higher of the Australian-born males. By the 1960s, this percentage declined to about 20%. But at least 1 out of 2 Italian males were working in their own rights. A late 1980s survey commissioned by the National Trust of Australia on Italian craftsmanship in building in Victoria identified, and I quote, some 100 leading Italo-Australian craftsmen, unquote, including architects, builders, painters, plasterers, stonemasons, and mosaic and terrazzo artisans and entrepreneurs from the mid-19th century onwards. Most of them came from the northeast part of Italy. Leading mosaic and terrazzo companies in Melbourne, such as the Marco Brothers and the Melocco Brothers in Sydney, or the Federation Granolletics, represented the tip of the iceberg, as tens of other firms operating in the city alone in the interwar period employed, we argue, hundreds of workers, and mainly from Veneto and Friuli. The suburb of Carlton, this suburb here, housed one of the highest concentrations of such firms. By the 1950s, Carlton, along with North Carlton, which is next door suburb, became known as Melbourne's Little Italy, a territorial expression and a fertile space of Italianness that was built and enriched by successive waves of Italian migrants. Then, writes Celestina Sagrazio, and I quote, concreting was an important local industry, unquote, with backcuts transformed and turned into business premises where young men like Luigi Rollo sort of set up the leading company in the sector in Australia, for instance, would, and I quote, jump onto onto the back of trucks and be driven off to a suburban work site, unquote. So, by examining the history of the Milan Paving Company, we'll dive into the complexities of historicising migrant businesses and migrant lives. And I contend the craftsmanship traditions and skills might have equally contributed to the rise, but equally to the fall of migrant-run businesses like this one. So in 1936, 3 Carlton-based paving contractors, Federico Rossimelli and Luigi Odorico, have known to be in partnership under the business name the Milan Paving Company. Now, it's unclear whether the 3 contractors took over an existing business all build their business from scratch, and we cannot sort of work out the direction between Milan and this three line. They all came from the northeast. Milan is the northwest. So, but we've noticed that some of these companies took up names, Genoa, Venice, so names of Italian cities. It could have been done just for commercial reasons. We don't know. Rossi and Rulli, aged in their mid-30s, had been residing and working in Australia for just over 10 years. So Dodorico, much younger than the other two and still in his mid-20s, had been in Australia for 8 years. All three belong to the interwar period, interwar migration from Fiji. Rossi came to Australia as a skilled terrazzo worker, Rulli as a carpenter, and Dodorico as a farm labourer. Federico Rossumel was born in 1900 in San Quirino, about 8 kilometers northeast of Pordenone. From 1923 until 1925, he had worked in France, possibly as terrazzo worker. His father was also a terrazzo worker. He was one of the terrazzieri responsible for the completion of the terrazzo floor of the church of San Quirino, right here. This is beautiful. Upon his arrival, he was employed as a wood cutter in Erica, which is a small country town located some 170 kilometers east of Melbourne. And that was the fact of lots of young Italian men at that time and migrants. In Italy, he left his wife Caterina, also native of San Quirino, aged 21, and his infant 3-month-old son Umberto. Caterina and Umberto eventually joined Federico in Australia 5 years later. When they both arrived in Melbourne in 1930, and a year later, their second child, Mario, was born. Lino Lee was born in 1901 in Miami in Riviera, which is about 20 kilometers northwest of Udine. He arrived in Australia in 1925, and since his arrival, he resided in Carlton. For at least 2 years, he worked as a plasterer. In March of 1933, he married Rita Job by proxy, a native of Tarcento in province of Udine, St. Mary. She arrived in Melbourne in October of that year. The younger of the three business partners, Luigi Dodorico, native of San Quirino, was born in 1911. He arrived in Australia in 1920, aged 17. He was a day labourer from a family of peasant stock background. After 6 months staying in the Latrobe Valley town of Moan in the Gippsland region, he resided in Erica for the next 4 years before moving to Melbourne in 1933. Immigration records tell us that several relatives of Federico, Luigi and Lino made their way to Australia before and especially after the Second World War through chain migration. So a set of family networks start to build up around these three. Between 1931 and 1939, all three business partners were naturalised. Census records tell us that Italians residing in Australia were keen to take up citizenship. Nearly half of all certificates of naturalisation in the year 1935, for instance, were granted to Italian nationals. The Milan Paving Company first operated from the backyard of 426 Cardigan Street, Carlton. The families of both Federico and Luigi lived in a double-storey Victorian terrace house at the front, business at the back, and Lino lived on 280 Drummond Street, Carlton, which is very nearby, less than half a kilometre away. A few years later, on the corner of Cardigan and Lytton Street, part of a woodyard, once stone yard, which is, you can sort of see, you can't read it, but stone yard turned into a woodyard, and then they rented out. It was rented out for some 10 years before the whole business moved up to a place in Nicholson Street, North Fitzroy, so a few suburbs up, and eventually Balmoral Street, Essendon, which is 7 kilometres from the original site. And this trajectory several businesses took in the course of the 20th century, so moving out from the inner suburbs for different reasons. In the Milan Paving Company, each partner performed a specific task. Rossimel was in charge of all terrazzo products, Urli of the concrete products, and Dodorico, who had been working as a paving contractor at the time of the creation of the business partnership and spoke better English in the other two, was the business manager and promoter. His wife Mary was employed as a bookkeeper. She was Australian, born to parents from Finland. Business records indicate that the company serviced the whole metropolitan area of Melbourne, so it wasn't just restricted to suburbs around Carlton, and was involved with small to large work of terrazzo and concrete. And here are the only surviving photos of identified buildings. This is probably Port Melbourne, according to the business ledgers. And sort of you can see workers and the way they laid out concrete. This is Rosimel in 1943. This is the industrial sort of warehouse, and eventually the finished product. And this could be commercial photos and showing sort of respective clients the way they work. It employed at least a dozen employees at any one time, and they were mainly from Friuli. Conversely, customers were primarily Anglo-Australians or from the wider community. But unlike other more prominent and well-documented and research companies in the sector, the Milan Paving Company has left a distinct trace of ordinariness. Throughout its existence, it remained small in size, family-run, mainly offering a mix of ordinary terrazzo and concrete paving products. Less ornamental, but in great demand. Only a few items document today the company's past existence and its production. A hand-painted wooden business sign with the last location, and a round table with a top made of terrazzo marble mosaic, a few interwar period photographs, and some work tools and 5 business ledgers. 3 oral history testimonies have been recently collected among the surviving children. So tracing the history of these or similar enterprises is a challenging undertaking. There are several lacunae existing and maybe few historical records. Apart from the ledgers, no business correspondence or drawings have survived. So why would this company's history matter? Now, over 10 years ago, renowned Italian historian Emilio Franzina lamented that our knowledge of micro and small-scale entrepreneurship of Italians abroad was still very limited and quite peripheral. Micro and small-scale entrepreneurship histories of migrants were often confined to the broad field of entrepreneurship and economic history. Successful or very successful businesses were often the object of research and broadening our understanding of American entrepreneurship. This is, for instance, the case of the study of intergenerational Italian migrant entrepreneurship in Victoria by Laura Hugas, who looked in depth at the experience of 3 generations of 7 Italian migrant families who established enterprises, this is very large enterprises, in the first generation, and sustain them and change and expand them dramatically over the subsequent generations. Equally, small business is examined when assessing particular type of business behavior. This is the case of what Jock Collins called cappuccino capitalism, the post-war experience of small business among Italians in key urban areas in Australia and the opportunities they were offered by the up-and-coming multicultural Australia. So they opened up new routes for micro, small-scale entrepreneurship and demand of ethnic products by the wider population. But this is a more recent phenomenon. Yet more than a decade on from Franzina's observation, our knowledge of Italian micro and small-scale migrant entrepreneurship abroad, especially in Australia, in the interwar period, is still quite limited and patchy. Recent studies like the Italians who built Toronto by Stefano Agnoletto offer stimulating insights. In the Canadian city, post-war small Italian house building entrepreneurs operated within a highly competitive, often unregulated and ununionized sector, in fact one that was ripe with opportunities. Construction laborers started their own businesses in reaction to discrimination, hostility, and racial barriers, or more precisely because of the more lucrative position of being self-employment as a way to become independent in different ways. But along with the migrant success came instances of failure and exploitation, and we talked about core ethnic exploitation, I think yesterday in one of the presentations. In the construction sector in Australia, not all companies were financially viable or possess the necessary entrepreneurial business skills or management skills. Some reverted back to subcontracting, others did not survive beyond 1 generation. This is the case of this company here. The business folded as the business partners retired by the mid-1960s. The business model, as we assumed or originally conceived, was not meant to grow or to be ambitious enough to go to the next step, reflects Mario Rosimel. Federico Rosimel's younger son, today in his late 80s. As they came of age, the children were systematically prevented by their parents to follow in their footsteps, or take over, or develop the business as one son-in-law wanted to. Ennio, Lee's son, who initially wanted to work with the Milan Paving company ended up getting a job with the Marco brothers. Mindful of the tough business environment, cutthroat competition during and after the Depression era, Simone and Dodorico were reluctant to take risks or cut corners like the newcomers, according to Alma, Dodorico's daughter, now aged 79. This trial for lavoro ben fatto, job well done. They remind us of the artisan virtuosity, business ethics, and traditional craftsmanship, which was much present in encouraging Friuli before the process of industrialization. To a degree, the Milan Paving Company epitomized the Italian background, small-scale concrete paving terrazzo company that operated between the interwar and the post-war periods, and that was instrumental, like many others, to the broad legacy of that the Italians had left in the Australian built environment since the late 19th century. So they possessed the necessary paving making skills and made it thrive for at least 3 decades. Those skills belong to a long-standing tradition, which was mentioned earlier, and this tradition found the urban landscape the opportunity to be applied, developed, and expanded. Such skills were, or have intentionally not passed on to the next generation in this case. The second generation was prevented from taking up and expand the business. And it was expected this second generation to move on and possibly up the social economic ladder. But the broad legacy the Italians have left in the Australian built environment make us wonder, and I conclude, about the fragile nature of migrant and business heritage. In 1949, the Housing Commission earmarked 426 Cardigan Street and nearby properties as the site for future development. The house was demolished and student accommodation for the local University of Melbourne was built. So, and you can sort of see there this picture of 1945 and a picture of today, and sort of these are 3, you can't see it clearly, but the 3 Victorian terrace houses and a stone yard here and new buildings. This is the fate shared by at least another construction company, the Federation Granolithic Company, when Villa Castelnuovo, as it was better known then, at 250 Palmerston Street, Carlton, which functioned as the premise for this terrazzo business, was also demolished in 1989 for education offices and workshops. The transitory presence of small enterprises like the Milan Paving Company from the inner city suburb make our efforts of historicising migrant businesses quite difficult. Yet it also encourages us to expand the boundaries of tangible and intangible migrant heritage by including skills and craftsmanship traditions. Moreover, it challenges to revisit a secular narrative of success among migrants and knowledge transmission among migrants in the pre and the post-war period.